Today's story is so intense, it changed the fate of an entire Apache land, unfolding in a wild west of burning sunsets, silent canyons, and spirits that refuse to be forgotten. This is where two souls from opposite worlds were pulled together by forces neither could escape. It all began with a small carved bird, something so simple, yet powerful enough to bind two hearts across generations. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. In the heart of the high desert, where the wind still carries whispers from long-forgotten ancestors, two strangers, each from separate worlds, were about to cross paths in a way neither could explain. When a literature teacher accepted a post at an Apache reservation school, she couldn't have known that the man waiting there had already seen her. In a dream. And between them, a hand-carved hummingbird would bind their fates in ways deeper than either dared imagine. Midnight fell quiet over the desert. Above Kael Tazhin's weathered canvas tent, the stars scattered across the velvet sky like sacred beads, their ancient light spilling down on the Apache lands, tucked in a forgotten corner of Arizona, where history and now still danced their eternal waltz. Sleep had once again slipped through Kael's fingers. At 42, he bore the silent weight of his people in the creases carved deep across his copper-brown brow, and in the silver strands lacing through his black hair. Outside, the wind stirred in a voice his grandmother would have understood, a tongue nearly lost, like so many sacred things. Sitting upright, Kael reached for the small wooden pendant resting on his chest. It had been carved by his father many winters ago, worn smooth by worry and time. A hummingbird in flight, Dawa, the sign of fierce resilience. For 3 weeks now, the dreams had returned. Always the same. A woman with flame-colored hair walked alone through the scrubland, her pale hands brushing against sage and mesquite, green eyes scanning the land like she belonged to it. Though dressed in modern clothes, she moved with the quiet rhythm of one who listened to the earth. And always she turned to him, lips parting as if to say something vital. But he woke before the words ever came. "What are you trying to tell me?" he asked the empty air, his voice soft, unsure if the spirits were still listening. The Hollow Creek Hall, where he worked as a counselor, stood underfunded and undermanned. The youth were leaving. The elders were dying. And still, the red-haired woman lingered in his dreams, like a puzzle missing its final piece. Kael stepped out into the cold night, bare feet connecting with the sacred dirt. The stars above looked down like quiet watchers, blinking their approval or their warning. He couldn't tell which. Somewhere beyond the junipers and thorned cactus that marked the line between reservation land and the outer town of Sagebrush Springs, the world kept racing forward. But here, time folded over itself like the canyon walls painted by centuries. He pressed his hand to the pendant, feeling its grooves like a question mark against his skin. "Who is she?" he asked the silent desert. "And why does she matter?" The wind offered no answer, but somewhere distant, a coyote cried, a lonesome call echoing the hollowness inside him. Lila Hart gripped the steering wheel of her battered old Subaru as it groaned over the last stretch of dry, cracked road. Her GPS had long since gone silent, leaving her with only a crumpled map and a set of handwritten directions from the tribal education office. 3 miles past the abandoned gas pump, hang right at the cactus with the forked arms, it had said. The world around her stretched wide and wild, copper-red dirt, scattered green brush, and a sky so vast it threatened to swallow everything whole. Sagebrush Springs, this dusty, sunburnt outpost, was to be her new home. It didn't feel real. Not yet. Not after the life she'd left behind in Boston. The boxes left half-packed in her apartment. Her mother's tear-streaked face. Her university colleagues' bewildered expressions. "You're throwing away your career, Professor," Whitman had said, not unkindly. "All that research on native literature and you're just leaving?" They didn't understand. They couldn't. Her dissertation might have earned praise, but it had left her empty. She'd written about cultures she had never truly touched, voices she only knew from printed ink. When the teaching post at Red Mesa School came up, it hadn't felt like an opportunity. It had felt like a calling. Her city-bred hair, tied back loosely, danced around her face in rebellious strands. She tucked one behind her ear and squinted through the windshield. Suddenly, the town appeared, rising from the desert like a ghost remembered too late. Low buildings baking beneath a punishing sun, a faded water tower, a single stoplight swinging idly in the heat. And just beyond, no signpost to mark it, lay the edge of the reservation. The shift was subtle. Older homes mingling with trailers, sacred symbols painted on walls, whispers of old ways in the air. She parked near a weathered grocery store. A handful of teens lounged in the shade, eyeing her with quiet curiosity. Lila became hyper-aware of her pale skin, her button-up shirt, her East Coast awkwardness. She didn't belong, and she knew it. But she forced herself out of the car anyway. The heat wrapped around her like a test. Beneath her boots, the ground pulsed, alive with memory, with voices buried beneath the sand. Reality tilted. Just for a moment, it was like the desert shifted, the horizon swaying like a wave. She grabbed the car door to steady herself. And then she saw him. A tall figure exiting the store, long hair streaked with silver, face lined by years and sun. He moved with a kind of stillness, the way mountains do. Strong, unmoved, present. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. Dark, endless, knowing. They locked eyes across the dusty lot, and Lila felt the air vanish from her lungs. She was falling, and yet her feet never left the ground. The man stopped cold, grocery bag suspended in mid-air. The world kept turning around them. Cars passed, wind stirred up grit. But in that suspended moment, something ancient stirred between them. Recognition. Unspoken. Immediate. In that still moment, something shifted in Lila Hart, as if the world had pulled in a breath and whispered, "Nothing will ever be the same." Red Mesa School sat low and squat against the desert, its cinder-block walls painted the color of sun-baked earth. Inside, the heat pressed in heavy, the old swamp cooler rattling like a dying mule. Lila arranged her desk with nervous fingers. Textbooks, lesson plans, a tiny cactus she'd grabbed from a gas station just outside Sagebrush Springs. 3 days had passed since she'd rolled into town. 3 days of unpacking boxes in her little rented cottage, figuring out where to buy groceries, flipping through curriculum files. And 3 days since she'd locked eyes with that man in the parking lot, Kael Tazhin, whose presence still haunted her like the edge of a dream. She hadn't seen him again, but he stayed in her mind, like a forgotten melody she couldn't shake. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. In stepped the school principal, Ruth Danner, her round face folded into a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "All settled in, Miss Hart?" "Almost," Lila replied, gesturing towards the still chaotic bookshelves. "Everyone's been kind." Ruth nodded, her silver-threaded braids shifting against her shoulders. "I wanted you to meet someone important. He helps us weave tribal tradition into the modern curriculum." She stepped aside, and there he was. Kael Tazhin. The same man from the parking lot, though now the space between them felt tighter, like the air itself was paying attention. Up close, his features were striking. High cheekbones, a faint scar near his temple, and eyes that looked like they remembered everything. "We've met," he said, voice low and rough like wind over canyon stone. Not formally, Lila said, reaching out, though her hand trembled slightly. His palm met hers, warm, calloused, and the brief contact sent a charge through her veins like lightning seeking ground. "This is Kael Tazhin," Ruth said. "He's our cultural liaison. He splits his time between Red Mesa and the Hollow Creek Hall." Kael nodded. "Your students will have questions, not just about literature, but about why you're here." Lila didn't flinch. "They'll ask what right I have to teach their stories." He didn't blink. "Do you have an answer for them?" Ruth shifted, visibly uncomfortable, but Lila held her ground. "I'm not here to speak for anyone. I'm here to listen, to learn, and maybe, if I'm lucky, to help bridge what I've studied and what's lived." Kael's expression softened, just barely. "That's a good place to start." Later, as the classroom emptied, Lila sat alone at her desk. Afternoon sun slanted through dusty blinds, striping her hands like some ancient map. She opened her journal and wrote just one line. "Today, I met someone I've somehow known forever." Outside, a raven landed on the wooden fence post. It watched her with ink-black eyes, then lifted off into the endless blue. The reservation library, once a chapel, stood quiet that Saturday morning. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, half covered by old bookshelves, casting colored patterns across worn carpet. Kael found her there. Lila sat cross-legged in the history section, surrounded by open books and the scent of sun-warmed paper. A stray beam of blue light lit up her copper hair like it had caught fire. She scribbled into a leather journal, lost in thought. She didn't notice him until his shadow cut across the page. "Oh," she gasped, looking up. "Mr. Tazhin—" "Kael," he corrected gently, crouching beside her and glancing at the books scattered around her like autumn leaves. "These are creation stories. I wanted to understand more before teaching oral traditions," Lila said, suddenly self-conscious. "I hope that's not out of place." He picked up a worn volume, the name of a well-known outsider scrawled across the front. A hint of steel crept into Kael's voice. "He wrote down our stories, but he didn't understand them. It's like taking a photo of a dance. You catch the image but miss the rhythm." "That's what worries me," Lila admitted. "Teaching something sacred when I wasn't born into it." Kael studied her face. Those river stone green eyes, the freckles on her nose, the look of someone trying to do it right. Not just do it. Something about her tugged at him, like he should remember her, but couldn't. "There's a better source," he said finally, rising. "Come with me." He led her past the librarian's desk, where Lonnie Skyfire sat quietly, as she had since Kael was a barefoot kid climbing trees instead of reading under them. She handed him a key without a word. Kael unlocked a cedar cabinet and pulled out a book unlike any other. Its covers polished wood, its pages hand-bound and thick, each one uneven. "This," he said, setting it gently on the table, "is the tribe's living record. Written in our elders' hands, passed down with sketches, pressed plants, even footnotes in Apache. We call it the Book of Shadows. Not for darkness, but for the echoes of those who walked before us." Lila's fingers hovered above the page, reverent. "It's beautiful." "I can help you find stories safe for classroom sharing," Kael offered. "Some things aren't meant to be dissected under fluorescent lights." They bent over the book together. Their shoulders almost touched. The air between them held something quiet, but alive. Lila smelled like something soft and floral, desert flowers after rain, blending with the scent of old paper and cedar. Kael pointed to a story about Spider-Woman and the sacred act of weaving. "This isn't just about making things. It's about connecting everything. thread by thread. Like literature, Lila whispered, weaving meaning, finding patterns. Their eyes met, and something shifted again, like a door opening between them neither had noticed before. Kael nodded slowly, exactly like that. Outside, clouds gathered, heavy with the promise of rain. In the desert, that promise was never taken lightly. "This is our people's memory," Kael Tazhin said, as they settled at a creaky wooden table tucked deep in the library's back corner. "Stories told by our elders, written in their own hands, notes, sketches, even pressed plants between the pages." He opened the heavy volume with care. "We call it the Book of Shadows, not because it's dark, but because it holds the shadows of those who walked before us." Lila Hart hovered her fingers over the page, not daring to touch. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you for showing me." "I can help you find passages safe to share with the students," Kael said quietly. "But some stories, some ain't meant for classrooms." They leaned over the book together, shoulders nearly brushing. The pages breathed with time, scents of cedar, dust, and faint desert sage. Lila's perfume was soft, like rain on wildflowers, just enough to unsettle Kael. He found himself distracted by her hands, the way her fingers moved across paper, how she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear as she focused. "This one," Kael said, pointing to a hand-drawn section about Spider-Woman. "She taught our people to weave, not just fabric but connection. Every thread tells a story. Every pattern is a prayer." "Like literature," Lila murmured. "Finding the threads, making meaning out of chaos." Their eyes met across the old pages, and in that gaze, something old stirred awake. "Ain't far off," Kael said, voice low. "Exactly like that." Outside, beyond the stained glass shadows, clouds gathered on the horizon. Desert rain was coming. Rare. Sacred. "She don't belong here," Dasan Koa said, his voice carrying clean across the hollow space of Hollow Creek Hall. No one asked him to keep it down. Kael heard the words, saw Lila's shoulders tighten as she continued setting up folding chairs for the school's very first Indigenous Voices night. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. Every word cut through just the same. Students had come. Parents, even a few elders. But so had resistance. Dasan stood near the doorway, arms crossed, voice full of grit. "No matter how many books she's read, she ain't one of us. Why's some outsider teaching our kids our stories?" Kael stepped beside his old friend and gently nudged him toward the refreshments. "She's doing the work, Dasan. And the kids, they're responding." "That's what worries me," Dasan muttered. "They'll start listening to her instead of their grandmothers." He turned, eyes sharp. "You've been spending time with her." It wasn't a question. The community noticed everything. Quiet conversations in the library, walks after school discussing curriculum, the kind of ease that doesn't come from paperwork. Nothing crossed a line, nothing improper. But something was growing, undeniable and real. "I'm the cultural liaison," Kael said evenly. Dasan scoffed. "That what they're calling it now?" Across the room, Lila stood in her green dress, looking like a willow planted in desert stone, out of place, yet somehow rooted. Kael's gaze lingered. That same unspoken pull tugged at him, same as it had the first time their eyes met. "Just remember who you are," Dasan said, his voice softer now, "and what you carry." Kael touched the amulet under his shirt. It felt heavier than usual. His grandmother had pressed it into his hand the night before she passed. A carved hummingbird. "You'll be a bridge," she told him. "But remember, bridges belong to both shores. And neither." Despite the tension, The evening unfolded smooth as polished stone. Students shared poems, raw, aching, beautiful, many written under Lila's guidance. Elders took turns telling stories, their words flowing like wind over canyon rock. Lila didn't seek attention. She stayed at the edges, directing eyes and ears to the storytellers, not herself. And when she did speak, to introduce a student or explain a theme, her voice held a deep, quiet reverence. Kael noticed how she'd picked up the rhythm of their speech. She paused where the elders paused. She let the words breathe. Afterward, when the crowd thinned and the chairs were folded, the two of them remained, sweeping floors, gathering cups, moving in sync. "Dasan Koa doesn't approve of me," Lila said finally, knotting a trash bag. She didn't look at him, just passed it his way. "Dasan doesn't approve of change," Kael replied. "But change don't wait for his permission. Is that what I am? Change?" Kael turned then, really looking at her. The woman who'd walked into his life like she was pulled from a vision. Since her arrival, things had stirred. In Sagebrush Springs, in the students, in himself. "I think," he said slowly, "you're a catalyst." "For what?" He shook his head. "Don't know yet." Lila stepped closer, careful to keep a respectful distance. "There's something between us, Kael. I can't explain it. But it's there." She gestured slightly between them, fingers tracing the space like smoke. "It's like I'm remembering you, not meeting you." The words hit home, deeper than she knew. Kael swallowed, looked at her long and quiet. "I've dreamed of you," he said. The words were out before he could pull them back, and the truth of it settled between them like thunder waiting to roll. "Before you came," Kael Tazhin said, voice low, "I dreamed of a woman, red hair like fire, walking through this land." Lila Hart didn't flinch. She didn't laugh it off either. She just nodded. "That doesn't surprise me as much as it probably should." She gathered her bag, ready to leave. Her movements were steady, but her eyes lingered on his. "What do you think it means?" she asked. Kael touched the spot over his chest where the carved hummingbird hung beneath his shirt. "I don't know yet," he said quietly. "But I think we're meant to find out." At the door, she paused, framed by the last light of dusk spilling through the tall windows. "There are boundaries here I don't know how to see, aren't there?" she asked. "Lines I might cross without meaning to." "Yes," Kael said honestly. "Many. Will you tell me when I reach one?" "I'll try." After she left, Kael stood alone in the quiet of Hollow Creek Hall. Dasan Koa's warnings echoed in his mind. The stares, the whispers, the weight of the generations that lived in his blood. But layered on top of all that was something new. A stirring, like discovering a hidden door in a wall he thought he knew. And since Lila's arrival, his dreams had stopped altogether. No visions, no voices, just a stillness in his sleep, as if the spirits were holding their breath. Shade Canyon, the place the elders called the Broken Land, split the northern edge of the reservation like a scar carved by gods. Towers of red rock reached skyward, jagged and defiant. Hidden springs bubbled where none should. Pictographs clung to shaded cliffs, the paint faded but not forgotten. Even among the elders, their meaning sparked debate. Lila walked carefully behind Kael, navigating the shale-strewn trail. The November air had turned sharp and clean. Her breath puffed in soft clouds as she moved. Above them, the sky was a perfect blue, unmarred by even a single contrail. "Careful here," Kael warned, offering his hand as they reached a narrow pass. His palm was warm, rough with calluses, and the second their skin touched, a strange spark raced up her arm. She caught her breath but didn't pull away. Over the last 2 months, they'd settled into something close to friendship. On the surface, just colleagues. But the lines kept blurring. Their talks wandered far beyond lesson plans. Lila had begun to recognize the flickers of humor in Kael's quiet nature, the fire beneath his calm counselor's voice when he spoke of his people. "Why do they call this the broken place?" she asked, stepping carefully over a ledge. Kael pointed ahead to where the canyon wall looked as if it had been split in two by a giant's hand. "Some say 2 spirit beings fought here, tearing the land apart," he said. "Others, geologists, say it was an earthquake." He glanced back at her, half smiling. "Both are true, in different ways." "Like literature," Lila said, her voice light. "Different interpretations. All valid." Kael chuckled, brief and genuine. "You really do see the world through books." "It's the only way I know how to make sense of it." She circled a boulder, then asked, "What about you? How do you make sense of things?" Kael was quiet for a long time. She thought maybe he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, "I listen. To the land. To the elders. To the silence between words. In our way, truth comes through patience, not conclusions." They crested a rise, and the canyon opened into a hidden valley. A spring bubbled from the rocks below. Cottonwoods shimmered in gold as the breeze touched their leaves. The place felt untouched, sacred. "It's beautiful," Lila breathed. Kael settled onto a flat rock and motioned for her to join him. "This is a place of healing." She sat beside him, careful to leave space between them. "Thank you for bringing me here." "You've earned a little trust," Kael said. "Your reading circles, the interviews with elders, you've shown respect. Even Dasan admits the students are reconnecting to the old ways because of it." Lila flushed with quiet pride. "They're incredible kids." "They are," he agreed. But Kael didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on the valley below. "That's not why I brought you here today." Lila sat still. The shift in his tone was unmistakable. "You once asked what the dreams meant," he said slowly. "So I spoke to Elder Noya." He opened his hand. Resting in his palm was the hummingbird amulet. "She believes you're tied to this somehow." The carving caught the sunlight, its wings delicate and almost in motion. "My father carved this for my grandmother," Kael said. "She was a keeper of healing traditions. Before she died, she passed it to me." His voice softened. "Elder Noya thinks you may be part of its path now." Lila stared at the amulet, resisting the strange impulse to reach out and touch it. "Why would I be connected to something like that?" she asked. "I don't know," Kael admitted, "but the dreams were different. And there's something about you I recognize, even though we've never met before." Above them, a hawk cut circles in the sky, its cry echoing against canyon walls. The moment hung between them like a story waiting for its next page. "I feel it too," Lila said quietly. "Like I've been here before. Like I'm remembering something, not discovering it." She looked down and noticed her hands were trembling. She clenched them together. "When I saw the job posting, it didn't feel like an opportunity. It felt like a summons. I can't explain it." Kael Tazhin nodded slowly, the canyon wind brushing past them like breath on skin. "My grandmother used to say some paths don't wait to be chosen. They choose you." Lila Hart smiled faintly, though something lingered behind her eyes. "What does Elder Noya think will happen?" Kael exhaled, amused and frustrated in equal measure. "She's maddeningly vague. Says the purpose will show itself, when it's ready." Lila let out a soft laugh. Helpful as always. They sat in a long silence, the kind that didn't press down, but stretched wide like the valley before them. Shadows shifted across the rocks below as the sun began its slow drift westward. I should tell you something, Lila said at last. I've been offered a fellowship, back east, a prestigious one. Something flickered in Kael's eyes, a spark of something. Concern? Resignation? It was gone before she could name it. Congratulations, he said. When would you go? I haven't accepted. She looked down, then back up at him. I promised to finish the school year, and I will. Relief eased the tightness in his shoulders. Good. The students would miss you. She tilted her head. Just the students? He didn't answer, and the question hung unspoken between them. On their way back through the canyon, Lila paused beside an ancient pictograph. Concentric circles coiling around a spiral etched into the red wall. What does this mean? She asked, lifting her camera but not touching the fragile rock. Journey and return, Kael said, his voice reverent. Going inward to find yourself, then coming back to share what you found. Lila traced the air near the marking with slow fingers. Journey and return, she repeated softly. I like that. By December, the land had changed. Not with snow, but with light. The stars shone sharper. The morning frost painted windows with delicate lace. And Kael felt that same clarity settling inside him, like the fog had thinned and finally revealed the shape of something real. Red Mesa School's winter celebration pulled from both roots, Apache ceremony alongside holiday cheer. Drumbeats thudded beside Christmas bells. Cedar smoke lingered in the air beside sugar cookies shaped like stars. In the gym, draped in paper snowflakes and pine, Kael stood watching Lila guide her students through their play. The gift of the stories. It was a tale they'd written together, blending tribal oral tradition with modern voices. She moved through the cast with quiet grace. Her long city hair was braided now, adorned with a single eagle feather, given to her by Lonnie Skyfire. A powerful gesture, a public welcome. Her deep green velvet dress matched her eyes exactly, the same eyes that found Kael's across the crowd and held there, before drifting back to her students. You're walking a dangerous path, came a familiar voice beside him. Kael didn't need to look. Elder Noya had appeared, as always, like smoke slipping through stone. I'm not walking any path, Kael murmured. The old woman snorted, a strange sound coming from someone so dignified. Her weathered face turned toward Lila. That red-haired one brings change, and change, well, it never comes without pain. You speak in riddles, grandmother, Kael said, using the title respectfully, despite no blood ties between them. And you pretend I don't understand. Her hand, thin but strong, patted his arm. The hummingbird chooses its keeper, boy. We don't chase it. We follow its flight. Before he could reply, she was already gone. Vanished into the crowd, like she'd never been there at all. But Kael felt the weight of her words settle in his chest, like the carved amulet beneath his shirt. The applause was thunderous. Families swarmed the students, pride shining in their eyes. Kael noticed it all. How the skeptics now greeted Lila with warmth. How students from other classes sought her out. How she had earned their trust not by speaking over tradition, but by listening first. Always listening. Even her rhythm had shifted. Her words slowed to match the cadence of the elders she'd spent months recording. She walked softer, stood steadier, as if the desert had begun shaping her from the inside out. Dasan Koa appeared at Kael's side without warning. She's leaving in June, he said flatly. She hasn't decided, Kael answered, though a quiet dread had already gripped him. Not yet. Tazhin gave him a long look. She will. They always do. He gestured to a knot of teachers from the nearby town. They come, they learn, and then they leave. That's what outsiders do. The words stung more than Kael wanted to admit. She's not like them. Tazhin sighed, expression softening just slightly. I hope you're right, old friend. But some lines exist for a reason. Later, with the night winding down and the stars cold and fierce above them, Kael found her outside the gym. Lila stood alone, arms folded against the crisp air, staring up at the sky like she was trying to memorize it. That was beautiful, Kael said, stepping beside her. The students did all the work, she replied, but the pride in her smile betrayed her. They've taught me more than I could have imagined. Kael nodded, eyes still on the stars. The silence between them now felt like a living thing, full of questions neither of them quite dared to speak. Tazhin thinks you'll take that fellowship, Kael said quietly. Lila's faint smile faded in the starlight. Does everyone here know about that? He shrugged. Small community. She turned toward him, her eyes steady and serious beneath the pale glow of the desert moon. I haven't decided. What would make the difference? The question escaped before he could stop it. The silence that followed stretched wide, filled with something heavy and unspoken. A reason to stay, she said at last, her voice barely more than a whisper. Kael felt the small wooden hummingbird beneath his shirt grow warm against his chest, a pulse of awareness that didn't feel like his own. Around them, the still night seemed to hold its breath. He took a step closer, slow, deliberate. Lila, he began. Miss Hart? A young voice cut through the air, shattering the fragile moment. A student stood by the door. We need help cleaning up inside. Lila's gaze lingered on Kael's for one last heartbeat before she turned away, calling softly to Nita. Left alone beneath the endless stars, Kael pressed his fingers against the amulet, feeling its edges, its ancient story, and its strange pull toward the woman who had somehow stepped out of his dreams into his waking life. What are you trying to tell me? He murmured to the carved hummingbird. As always, it gave no answer, but he could have sworn it glowed faintly warmer, like a coal waiting for breath to turn it into flame. January brought rare snow to Sagebrush Springs. Not the thick Boston blizzards Lila once knew, but a light dusting that turned the red desert white for a fleeting morning. From her cottage window, she watched the children of Red Mesa chase laughter through the cold, building tiny snowmen before the sun melted them into glimmering puddles. The sound of their joy drifted through the still air like music. She was grading papers at her kitchen table when a knock came at the door. A mug of cooling tea sat by her elbow. When she opened it, a tall woman stood there. Perfect blonde hair, flawless makeup, a camel-colored coat that screamed city money. "Surprise!" the woman exclaimed. "My God, Lila, you really are in the middle of nowhere." Lila froze. "Clara? What on earth are you doing here?" Clara Vance, chair of the fellowship committee and Lila's former mentor, swept inside like she owned the place, bringing with her a wave of expensive perfume and that old air of superiority. "Just checking in on my brightest student," she said, glancing around the humble space. The mismatched furniture, the handmade pottery, the cinderblock shelves lined with tribal texts and field notes. "Charming. Very authentic. You should have called," Lila said, closing the door against the cold. "It's a long drive from Phoenix." "And miss the look on your face?" Clara smiled thinly, peeling off her leather gloves. "The committee's been worried. You haven't replied to our last 2 emails about the fellowship." Lila busied herself making fresh tea, trying to buy a moment to breathe. She had seen the emails, just couldn't bring herself to answer them. "I've been focused on the new curriculum," she said evenly. "It's going well. The students are building a community oral history project that connects—" Clara cut her off. "This fellowship is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Lila. Publication, tenure track, national recognition." She accepted the tea with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Whatever frontier fantasy you're chasing out here, it's time to wake up." The words hit like a slap. "That's incredibly disrespectful," Lila said, her voice trembling with controlled anger. Clara sighed dramatically. "I didn't mean it that way. I'm just worried about you, professionally and personally. You're isolating yourself, wasting potential." "I'm doing meaningful work," Lila countered sharply. "Work that actually matters, to real people, not just papers written for tenure committees." Clara's gaze narrowed, something sharp and knowing glinting there. "Ah, so there is someone keeping you here." "What? No, that's not—" "The counselor, right?" Clara's smile turned smug. "The one you mentioned in your emails, Kael Tazhin." Lila stiffened. "The committee had questions about your methodology," Clara continued, "but I defended you, said your immersive approach was perfectly sound. Still—" She leaned forward, voice dropping conspiratorially. "If you were to, I don't know, develop a romantic entanglement with your subject, it might make quite the scandal, or quite the story." Lila set her mug down with deliberate precision. "You need to leave. Don't be dramatic, Lila. Now." She rose to her feet. "You've completely misunderstood why I'm here, and what I'm doing. And Kael isn't a subject." Her voice shook, not from fear, but from the fury of being reduced to something she wasn't. Outside, the desert wind howled softly against the windows, carrying sand and snow together like two worlds that were never meant to meet. But somehow, tonight, they did. "He's a colleague. And a friend," Lila said, her voice steady. Clara Vance rose from the chair, brushing invisible dust off her luxurious coat. "Just a friend?" she repeated, eyes narrowing with interest. "How interesting." She moved toward the door, but paused with one hand resting on the knob. "The fellowship deadline is February 15th, she said flatly. "Don't throw away everything you've built over some guilt trip, or misplaced feelings for a man whose world you don't belong to." And then she was gone, heels clicking against the porch boards, the scent of her designer perfume lingering like smoke after a shot's been fired. Lila remained frozen at her kitchen table, half-graded student papers scattered like fallen leaves. Her tea had gone cold. Outside, the desert snow was already beginning to melt, the red earth reclaiming itself beneath the pale white dust. She reached for her phone. Kael's name sat at the top of her contact list. Her thumb hovered, then dropped away. What would she even say? That her mentor, the woman who once shaped her academic path, had called their connection a research subject? That the world she used to belong to saw this place not as a calling, but as a case study? The sun pierced through the thinning clouds, casting a golden stripe across her table. It illuminated student essays, thoughtful reflections on identity, and the threads that connect generations. Her eyes landed on the careful handwriting of Lila Tazhin, who had written about her grandmother's weaving traditions and how she now repurposed those same patterns into digital designs. "The patterns survive," Nita had written, "even as the materials change. That's how we endure, by keeping what matters and evolving what must." Lila closed her eyes, letting the words settle deep inside her. When she opened them again, her gaze fell upon the small clay pot gifted by Lonnie Skyfire. The traditional design swirled beneath a bold, contemporary glaze, old and new, side by side. A beautiful tension. The question wasn't whether she should stay or go. It was who she was becoming, wherever she chose to be. At Hollow Creek Hall, the meeting room smelled of sage and strong coffee. Through the window, Kael Tazhin watched early February clouds roll over the mesas, heavy with rain. Around the circle, his colleagues exchanged notes, updates, numbers. The voices murmured with purpose. But Kael's mind drifted. Lately, it always drifted. To her. Since the winter break, something had changed. Lila still worked beside him, still collaborated on school programs and projects, but there was a subtle distance now. A wall, like something fragile had been shelved and quietly left behind. Kael? Ruth Danner's voice pulled him back. Any updates on the mentoring program? He straightened in his chair, nodding. The elder-youth pairings are going well, he said. The teens are learning directly from tradition bearers, language, crafts, stories. He paused. And thanks to Lila's curriculum integration, they're earning credit while preserving their roots. When the meeting ended, most folks filed out, but Elder Noya stayed behind. She didn't speak right away, just watched him with those eyes that had seen nearly a century. Your thoughts, she said softly, are scattered like autumn leaves. Kael didn't deny it. I'm worried. The end of the school year brings change. Elder Noya nodded knowingly. Including the red-haired teacher. She's conflicted. We all are, Kael replied, though he didn't sound convinced. Elder Noya smiled, deep lines folding like riverbeds across her face. Bring her to my home tomorrow evening. For what? She needs to understand what she's truly part of. Part of what? But Elder Noya simply patted his arm and shuffled toward the door, leaving Kael with more questions than peace. As usual. Lila agreed to the visit, her curiosity plain in the set of her jaw. They drove into the dusky twilight, the sky a deep indigo, the land turning to shadowed silhouettes of canyon and cactus. I've always wanted to meet her properly, Lila said. Her interviews have been the foundation of half the cultural archive. Kael glanced sideways at her, lit by the dashboard glow. She asked for you specifically, he said, and Elder Noya never does anything without a reason. Should I be nervous? He gave it thought. Respectful? Yes. Nervous? Only if you try to bluff her. And don't. They pulled up to a small clearing. Elder Noya's home stood apart from the others, a traditional hogan beside a modest modern structure, joined by a covered walkway. The garden surrounding it lay dormant under winter's breath, but everything was tidy, ordered, alive beneath the sleep. The medicine woman opened the door, wrapped in a shawl that looked older than the town itself. Welcome to my home, she said with ceremonial calm, ushering them inside. The air smelled of cedar and old wisdom. A small brazier crackled near the corner. Inside, the space was unlike anything Lila had expected. Traditional weavings shared shelves with thick medical textbooks. A ceremonial drum rested beside a flat-screen TV. Photographs lined the walls. Tribal elders in regalia, younger Clara in graduation robes from the University of Arizona, dated 1963. They sat cross-legged around a low table. Elder Noya poured tea into delicate china cups. You come with questions, she said, looking directly at Lila. And Lila knew this wasn't going to be just tea. You haven't said them aloud, Elder Noya said softly, but the questions are already in you. Lila Hart's eyes widened, surprised at being read so easily. I guess I do. The old woman gave a single, knowing nod. You wonder about your place here, why our stories feel like your own, why this land calls to you like an old friend. Her gaze slid toward Kael Tazhin before returning to Lila. "And about a connection that feels older than the day you first met." "How do you know?" Lila whispered. Elder Noya tilted her head with a small smile. "Same way I know when rain's coming, even before the clouds show." She reached for a cedar box on a nearby shelf, placing it gently on the low table. "Your spirit speaks clearly, to those willing to listen." From the box, she pulled a small bundle wrapped in worn deerskin and bound with sinew. The leather had aged to a deep mahogany over generations. "This medicine bundle belonged to my grandmother's grandmother," she explained. "It's held sacred objects passed through the hands of the women healers in our line." Unwrapping it carefully, she revealed the contents: a carved river stone, a pair of bird feathers, sprigs of dried herbs, a small shell, and nestled at the center, a wooden hummingbird, carved in the same style as the one Kael wore. Lila gasped. "Another one?" Elder Noya nodded. "It's the twin, carved from the same branch by Kael's great-grandfather. He had a vision. 2 hummingbirds, flying between worlds." She held it up, and in the firelight the wood shimmered with the oils of countless hands who had passed it down. "One stayed with the men's healing line, the other with the women's. You never needed both before," she said, glancing at Kael. "Until now." Kael leaned forward, eyes fixed on the amulet. "You never told me there were 2. You never needed to know." Her tone was calm, unapologetic. "But now, the time's right." She turned the hummingbird in her fingers, then offered it toward Lila. "The legend says when the 2 are joined and held by the right hearts, they'll open the path for healing, between worlds that forgot how to touch." Lila didn't move. Her eyes flicked to Kael, unsure. "I'm not part of this, of your tradition. I don't have the rights," Elder Noya interrupted gently. "This ain't about rights. The hummingbird chooses. It's been waiting for you. We just didn't see it until now." Kael spoke up, voice low and strained. "But how can you be sure?" The old woman's eyes twinkled. "Because the day she stepped on this land, your dreams changed. Because she feels memories she can't name. And because your amulet heats like summer stone when she's near." Her gaze pierced him. "Tell me it doesn't." Kael had no answer, because it was true. Every time Lila was near, the carved bird on his chest warmed, like it recognized her. Lila looked between them, emotion tugging at her face, confusion, wonder, disbelief. "I don't understand what this means." "Understanding comes later," Elder Noya replied, placing the second hummingbird into her hand. "But first comes acceptance." The moment the amulet touched Lila's skin, Kael's own began to radiate heat beneath his shirt. He flinched slightly, stunned. Across the table, Lila's sharp breath told him she felt it too. Their eyes met. Something passed between them in that gaze. Recognition, deep and wordless. "What happens now?" Lila asked, voice barely above a breath. Elder Noya began rewrapping the sacred bundle, movements careful and measured. "Now," she said simply, "you listen for the next part of the story." And outside, as if the desert itself heard the call, the long-awaited rain began to fall. Soft at first, like distant heartbeats on the roof. By March, the wind had begun scouring the desert again, peeling back layers of sand to reveal the bones of the land beneath. Behind Red Mesa School, Lila knelt in the soft soil of a dry arroyo, guiding her students in their first real field dig. The interdisciplinary archaeology project she'd launched with the science teacher was finally underway. "Miss Hart, look at this," Nita Tazhin called out, holding up a pottery shard streaked with faded geometric lines. It looks like the pattern in my grandma's basket. Lila leaned over to examine it. You're right, Nita. Excellent eye. That's exactly the kind of cultural continuity we're trying to document. The students gathered around, comparing the ancient shard to modern designs in their printouts. Lila watched them with quiet pride, how they held the past with reverence and the present with confidence. Since the night Elder Noya had placed the second hummingbird in her palm, Lila had felt changed, grounded, connected. It hung now beneath her blouse, resting against her skin, always warm. She could feel Kael's presence before she saw him, could sense him walk into a room before the door even creaked. It was equal parts wonder and fear, this bond they still hadn't named. But it was real. "Teacher's pet alert," someone whispered. A few students turned as Kael approached, carrying a folder under one arm. Lila's heartbeat kicked up before she could rein it in. The hummingbird pulsed gently at her chest. "Mr. Tazhin," she greeted, her tone professional, steady. "Checking on our dig?" "Actually," he said, holding out the folder, "I brought the historical records you asked for." Their fingers brushed in the exchange. And there it was again, that electric hum, the silent acknowledgement of something neither fully understood, but both could feel. The students kept digging under the science teacher's watchful eye, while Lila Hart and Kael Tazhin stepped aside, poring over brittle maps and handwritten documents together. "These are incredible," Lila murmured, her fingers gliding over a hand-drawn map from the 1870s, its edges worn, its ink faded. "It shows the original borders of tribal land. Look at this line. It runs right through what's now the town hall." Kael nodded. "Came from Dasan's family archives," he said. "His grandfather was the tribe's historian." Lila blinked. "Dasan? That Dasan Koa?" Kael smirked faintly. "People change their minds, eventually." Lila turned her attention back to the map, but her focus wandered. Kael stood close, too close for her heartbeat to ignore. That cedar scent she'd come to associate with him drifted over her like smoke from a sacred fire. Then the words slipped out. Quiet. Honest. "The fellowship deadline passed last week." Kael froze. "I didn't submit the acceptance," she added, voice steady but soft. "I asked for a deferral. 1 year." He turned to her slowly. "A year." Lila looked up, meeting his gaze full on. "I'm not ready to leave. Not yet. There's still too much here, unfinished work. The curriculum, the archives, the mentorships." She hesitated. "And there are conversations we haven't finished either." Kael's expression eased. Something like relief flickered in his dark eyes. "A wise choice," he said. "Some trails can't be rushed." "Ms. Hart!" a student called out, waving frantically. "You gotta see this!" They hurried back to the dig site where a group of students stood around a small pit. In the center, an object, dull and misshapen, peeked through the clay. Lila knelt down, brushing away the dirt with practiced hands. Slowly, the shape emerged. A carved figure, stone-aged and time-worn. "It's a bird," Nita Tazhin said, squinting over Lila's shoulder. Kael crouched beside them, his voice low and reverent. "Not just any bird. That's a hummingbird." Lila's hand froze. Beneath her shirt, the wooden amulet warmed instantly, sending heat pulsing through her chest. She glanced up and saw Kael reach instinctively for his own necklace. Their eyes locked above the sacred artifact, and a current of shared understanding passed between them like a flash of lightning across open sky. Whatever this was, it reached deeper than the two of them. It went back generations, centuries maybe. That evening, alone in her small adobe cottage, Lila placed the stone carving, approved for short-term study by the Tribal Preservation Board, beside the wooden hummingbird Elder Noya had given her. One made from tree, the other from stone. Centuries apart, but unmistakably kin. She opened her journal, stared at the blank page for a long while, then finally wrote, "I'm part of a story I don't fully understand, on a path I can't entirely see. But for once, I'm not afraid of not knowing. It feels like remembering." Outside, a spring storm swept across the desert, scattering light like prayers. Rainbows stretched briefly across the horizon, turning mud and thorn into something momentarily divine. By April, the land had come alive. Wildflowers bloomed where only sand had lived. Cactus blossoms flared like flames. The dry wash behind Red Mesa School surged briefly with runoff, a stream resurrected by the rains. Inside the counseling center, Kael sat at his desk, sorting through applications for the summer youth program. He'd barely finished reading the first one when Ruth Danner appeared in the doorway, holding an envelope. "Special delivery," she said, dropping it on his desk. "Came in with the school mail. It's from Iron Valley University." Kael stared at the cream-colored envelope, thick and official-looking. Maya L. Hart, the name printed in bold. His stomach clenched. "Figured you might want to give it to her yourself," Ruth added, then walked out. He didn't open it, just sat there, studying it like it might speak first. It didn't. Most likely the fellowship board, pushing for a decision, even after her deferral, trying to lure her back to lecture halls and tenure tracks, back to a life that didn't include him, the wooden amulet pressed hot against his chest. This wasn't how any of this was supposed to unfold. What had started as curriculum meetings and classroom plans had turned into something more, something neither of them had words for, something older than either of them, rooted deep in the land, and maybe, just maybe, the ancestors. He tucked the envelope into his satchel and tried to return to work, but his mind was already gone. Following the sound of children laughing on the basketball court outside, the elders gathered in circles of slow conversation, the women weaving in quiet rhythm beneath a shaded porch. This was his world, and if she chose it too, maybe it could be theirs. The world Lila Hart had stepped into might have welcomed her, but it wasn't truly hers. Not yet. And Kael Tazhin couldn't forget Dasan Koa's words echoing like boot heels on dry wood. They come, they study us, then they leave. That thought sat heavy in his chest as he found her in the school library later that afternoon, huddled with students among the shelves. The air smelled of dust and cedar. Her copper hair, pulled into a loose knot, had strands falling free around her face as she leaned over a laptop, explaining digital metadata to a wide-eyed teenager. A turquoise pendant, a gift from Lonnie Skyfire, rested lightly over her white blouse. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. No hesitation, no guardedness, just warmth. "Kael," she called, gesturing him over. "Perfect timing. Eli's got a question about how to sort traditional knowledge into the archive." The teenager nodded. "Western systems don't fit our stories, Mr. Tazhin. They break things apart that are supposed to be together." Kael felt a flicker of pride. "That's a problem our people have faced for generations," he said, lowering himself beside them. "Let's see what we can build instead." They spent the next hour brainstorming, creating a new classification system, one rooted in indigenous storytelling logic, yet readable by outsiders. Knowledge woven, not stacked, interconnected, not split. By the time the bell rang and students drifted out, only Lila and Kael remained. "This project," she said, gathering stray notes, "could be a blueprint for other communities. These students, they've created something real. They had a teacher who believed in them, Kael replied. Then he remembered. He reached into his satchel and pulled out the envelope. "This came for you today." Lila took it, recognizing the seal from Iron Valley University. Her expression shifted, but she only nodded. "Thank you." She set it aside without opening it. "You're not going to read it?" he asked. "Later," she said, brushing it off. "I'd rather finish what we started with the archive." But Kael had seen the flicker in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. "Lila," he said gently, "you don't have to pretend the fellowship isn't important." She exhaled, her fingers tracing the envelope's edge. "It's complicated. That world, it feels so far away now. But I spent years chasing it, building it." Her eyes met his. "Have you ever felt like you're caught between two selves? The person you were, and the person you're becoming?" Kael nodded slowly. "Every single day," he said. "I live between Apache traditions and modern systems, between holding tight and letting change in." "And how do you live in that tension?" "I don't always reconcile them," he admitted. "Sometimes the tension itself is the lesson. It pushes me to ask better questions and find new trails where old ones end." Lila was quiet for a moment. "That's what I've been feeling," she whispered. "Not like I'm abandoning my academic roots, but reshaping them, making them part of something alive." The wooden hummingbird warmed against Kael's chest. He wondered if hers was glowing too. "Open it," he said quietly. "Whatever it says, it's part of the path." Lila hesitated, then broke the seal. As she read, her face shifted. Surprise, confusion, and then something he hadn't seen in a long while. Wonder. "It's not from the fellowship board," she said finally. "It's from Judge Silas Boone, the university president." She looked up, stunned. "They're offering me a new position, director of a center for indigenous literary studies, with funding to build community-based curriculum, and a satellite program based here, on the reservation." Kael blinked. "They want you to stay." "They want me to connect," she corrected, voice trembling. "To bridge the academic world with the knowledge systems we protect here, not just study tradition, honor it." She handed him the letter. "Read it." Kael skimmed the formal language. Program details, structure, funding, and there it was. A direct mention of Sagebrush Springs as the first pilot site. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a call to action. "This is unexpected," Kael said at last. "It's more than that," Lila said. "It's right. I didn't know what I wanted until this moment." Her green eyes glowed with certainty. "If Boone's council approves the partnership, I'm staying," she said. "Not just for a semester, for something we build that lasts." The weight of her words settled in the space between them. This wasn't just professional. It was personal, cultural, spiritual. "What will you tell them?" Kael asked. Lila smiled. "That I accept." Outside the library windows, the sun dipped low, casting the desert in strokes of fire and shadow, like the land itself was marking the moment of change. That evening, the tribal council chambers at Hollow Creek Hall were filled to the brim. Every seat taken, more standing in the back. Photos of ancestors lined the walls. Wisdom lived in every wrinkle, every story still whispered. Kael sat beside Lila in the front row. Every glance, every whispered conversation around them carried weight. Tonight, the community wasn't just listening. They were deciding. Lila Hart's proposal to bring an indigenous literary study satellite program right onto reservation land had stirred more interest than anything Boone's council had seen in years. The chamber at Hollow Creek Hall buzzed with energy. Elders, students, parents, all packed shoulder to shoulder, filling every wooden bench, every patch of standing room. As council chairman, Dasan Koa called the meeting to order with solemn tradition. He opened with a land blessing and an acknowledgement of ancestors, his voice steady, rooted. Lila sat upright in the front row, her shoulders square, her hands still, though Kael Tazhin could feel the quiet intensity radiating off her like heat from canyon stone. Beneath her blouse, the wooden hummingbird rested against her heart. She touched its outline from time to time, not fidgeting, but grounding herself. "Ms. Hart," Dasan intoned formally, "you may present your proposal." She rose, walking to the podium with the grace of someone who belonged, not because she'd always been part of this place, but because she'd earned the right to stand there. The green dress she wore, the same one from Indigenous Voices Night months ago, no longer looked like something borrowed. It flowed like it had been made for her. She looked every bit herself. "Thank you," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "When I first arrived last fall, I came as a teacher, a scholar. I believed I understood Indigenous literature through my research and academic training." She let a soft smile tug the corner of her mouth. "But I was wrong. What I knew was only the surface." She spoke of her journey, not just across miles, but across understanding. From theory to real experience, from observer to collaborator. She spoke of the oral history archive, of the way the curriculum now wove together the old with the new. "This proposal," she continued, gesturing to the packet before each council member, "isn't about studying your community. It's about learning from it. It's not extraction, it's partnership, respectful, reciprocal." Kael watched the room. Ruth Danner nodded encouragingly. Elder Noya wore that mysterious little smile of hers. Dasan remained unreadable. Around the room, folks leaned in, not just listening, engaged. Lila wasn't selling them a pitch. She was offering a vision, one that brought Iron Valley University's resources without handing over cultural control. "This is a new kind of relationship," she said in closing, "one where Indigenous knowledge stands at the center, not as a relic, but as a living force in contemporary education." She let the silence settle, let her words breathe. "I offer this proposal with gratitude for all you've taught me these past months." What followed was no less important. Questions, concerns, clarifications. Lila answered each one with calm and care. She spoke when needed, deferred when right, always aware of the lines she had learned not to cross. When community comments were invited, it was Lani Skyfire who stood first. Her silver hair gleamed in the light, and her voice carried the weight of someone whose words mattered. "I was skeptical when this girl first showed up," she admitted plainly. "Seen plenty like her. They come, they poke around, they leave." She paused, then nodded toward Lila. "But she listened, she stayed, and she earned my respect." Her words landed heavy, in the best way. Other voices followed. Parents spoke of their children growing more confident. Elders spoke of how stories once nearly forgotten were now recorded and cherished. Younger folks wondered aloud about job opportunities in the university program. But not every voice was favorable. A few worried about outside influence, about cultural sovereignty, about promises that might fade with funding. Lila didn't flinch. She didn't push back. She acknowledged every concern, owned every limitation. Kael sat beside her, pride rising like morning light. She hadn't just grown, she'd become part of this place. Finally, Dasan looked up. "You propose a 3-year pilot," he said. "But what happens after that? What if the university pulls out? Will you stay?" It was the question that mattered most. The one everyone had been too cautious or too afraid to ask out loud. Lila nodded slowly. "My commitment isn't tied to funding," she said. "I found something here I didn't even know I was looking for." Her hand moved to the hummingbird beneath her blouse. This isn't just professional, it's personal. Whatever shape this program takes, I'll stay, for as long as I'm welcome." She turned to Kael briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, clear as a sunrise. "Some ties," she said, turning back to Dasan, "can't be undone by budget cuts or bureaucracy." Dasan studied her. His weathered face gave nothing away. Then, he smiled. Just a little. But Kael caught it. "We'll take your proposal under deliberation," he said. "Expect an announcement next week. Thank you, Ms. Hart." As the meeting moved on, Lila returned to her seat beside Kael. Her shoulders didn't drop, but her hands began to tremble slightly in her lap. He reached over and covered them with his. "You did well," he said softly. "What do you think they'll decide?" She whispered. Kael didn't answer right away. He thought of everything he'd watched over the months, his people's shift from doubt to trust. He thought of Lila's students, of Elder Noya's dreams, of the letter that started it all. He looked toward her and smiled. "I think they already have." "I believe," Kael Tazhin said slowly. "Some stories are already written in the stars, long before we even know we're part of them. Outside, the desert breathed beneath a sky scattered with constellations, ancient light glinting over a land as old as time and just as mysterious. May brought ceremony season to Sagebrush Springs. It was the time when traditions bloomed like wildflowers after rain, ritual dances for planting season, sacred songs for daughters stepping into womanhood, gatherings to honor the ancestors whose hands still shaped every stone, every name, every story. And for the first time in living memory, a non-native teacher had been invited to witness certain rites usually kept far from outsider eyes. "It's not just an invitation," Kael told her as they drove into the amber twilight. "It's a mark of trust. The council's approval last week, it changed how folks see your place here." Lila Hart sat quiet in the passenger seat, her expression solemn. "I know what it means," she said softly. "I'll observe. I won't take notes, I won't write about it." Kael nodded. "It's not just about respect. It's about knowing some things ain't meant to be explained. They're meant to be felt." The ceremonial ground rested in a natural stone bowl, a canyon hollowed by wind and time. Families gathered in clusters on woven blankets. Elders sat in circles, faces weathered by sun and memory. Near the fire, dancers readied their regalia, beads, feathers, and stories sewn into every seam. Lila followed Kael to the spot where Elder Noya waited, wrapped in ceremonial robes, her skin painted in sacred patterns that made her look like she belonged to another age entirely. "Welcome, daughter of stories," the old woman greeted Lila, calling her by the name elders had begun to use. "Tonight, you witness, not record." "I'm honored," Lila replied, and the words felt right. Earned, not borrowed. They took their place on a blanket near the outer ring of the gathering, the firelight flickering across their faces. As the sun dipped behind the rocks, the first drumbeats began. Slow, steady, like a heartbeat pulled from the soil itself. The dancers emerged from the darkness like spirits called by flame. They moved not with choreography, but with memory. Their bodies told stories older than writing, their feet whispering prayers in dust and rhythm. Lila watched, breath held. Everything she'd once studied in books felt small beside what she was witnessing now. Real, alive, sacred. Kael leaned close, his voice barely above the wind. He offered soft explanations, a name, a symbol, a meaning, but he didn't speak often. He knew this wasn't a lecture. This was a ceremony. Around Lila's neck, the wooden hummingbird began to warm. She'd grown used to its quiet stirring, but tonight it pulsed like it recognized something. She glanced sideways. Kael's hand was pressed to his chest, too, his face unreadable. Then the women's blessing dance began. Elder Noya stirred beside them. "The amulets are waking," she whispered. "It's time." Without waiting, she rose and moved into the shadows, beckoning them to follow. They obeyed, following her into a smaller clearing tucked behind a wall of junipers. Another fire burned here. Low, steady, sacred. "Take off your amulets," Elder Noya instructed, her voice gentle but firm, "and place them in my hands." Kael and Lila hesitated only a moment before unfastening the hummingbirds. They laid them, worn wood, warm from skin, into her palms. The amulets were near identical, but not quite. Like twins born of the same tree, each carried its own story. "These were carved from a tree struck by lightning," Noya said, her eyes catching firelight. "A tree that stood between earth and sky. Burned, but not broken." She brought the two birds together, just enough that their wings brushed. For generations, they stayed apart. Each one held half the healing. But together. She reached into the pouch at her waist and drew out a third object, the stone hummingbird Lila had unearthed at the excavation. This one is their ancestor, carved 1,000 years ago, when our people first understood the hummingbird's gift. It flies between worlds, between stillness and motion. It drinks sweetness from unexpected places. She laid the stone beside the two wooden ones. The firelight glinted on all three, past, present, future, root, branch, blossom. "You two were dreamed together," she said, her gaze piercing both of them. "Long before you met, you, Lila, bridge knowledge between peoples. You, Kael, carry medicine from tradition into tomorrow. Together, you heal the space in between." Lila felt her breath catch. The fire, the warmth, the drumbeats from the main circle, they all pulsed in her veins like prophecy. Kael spoke quietly, his voice thick. "What does this mean for us?" Elder Noya smiled, and with her face painted in old symbols, it looked like the smile of time itself. "That is yours to discover." She handed the amulets back, but reversed. Kael now received the one Lila had worn, and Lila took the one that had always belonged to Kael. "Wear each other's medicine," the elder said, "and learn what it means to see through each other's eyes." From the distance, the drums shifted. "That's the unity dance," Noya said. "You should go." "I don't know the steps," Lila whispered. "You do," the elder replied, smiling. "Your feet remember. Some dances are written in the soul before they reach the body." She gently guided them back toward the fire, where dancers had begun circling, moving in rhythm, step and sway, part and rejoin. The fire roared, the stars shimmered, and Kael and Lila stepped into the circle. Together. The lead drummer gave a nod, parting the circle just enough for Kael Tazhin and Lila Hart to step in. Lila felt the weight of eyes all around them, elders, youth, strangers, and kin, watching this moment unfold, not just as witnesses, but as keepers of what it meant. Kael reached for her hand, warm and steady. "Follow me," he whispered, "but let the drum speak to your feet." And it did. The rhythm wrapped around her like a living thing. It moved through her bones, carried her forward, pulled her in. Her early missteps faded. Soon, her feet knew what her mind had yet to understand. This was a remembering, not a learning. The hummingbird she wore, once Kael's, pressed warm against her chest, his medicine pulsing through her. Across from her, Kael danced with the one she had worn for so long, carrying her story against his heart. They danced until boundaries faded, until names and labels timelines and origins all blurred like constellations behind a film of tears. They danced until Lila felt what Elder Noya had meant, that some truths are not written, only lived. By dawn, when the desert sky blushed gold and the first light kissed the mesas, they were still moving, still one with the circle. Summer rode into Sagebrush Springs on a wave of heat and renewal. School had ended. The partnership was signed. The first bricks of the new curriculum were being laid. Lila's little adobe cottage, once a place she rented, now bore her fingerprints. Her books, her blankets, her hand-thrown pottery from Lonnie Skyfire. It was home now. She sat on the porch, sipping iced tea as the sun slipped behind the ridges, turning the desert into a watercolor of reds and violets. The wooden hummingbird, Kael's once, rested against her collarbone, warm as ever. She didn't need to turn when she heard the footsteps. She smiled. Right on time. Kael climbed the porch, settling into the chair beside hers. The sunset called me. She smirked. That so? Well, maybe you too. His smile came slowly, but when it did, it transformed him, made him look like the man she first saw across that dusty parking lot, and somehow also like the boy he used to be before time and grief carved lines into him. His hand moved to the amulet resting on his chest. Hers now, and Lila reached for her tea, grounding herself in the moment. The final contract came in today, she said, not looking at him. 3 years of funding, with the option to renew. He nodded. You did it. We did it, she corrected. He tilted his head. First indigenous literary satellite program in the country. And just the beginning, she said. We've got assessments to build, coordinators to train, partnerships to solidify, without diluting the roots. It'll be a balancing act. You'll walk that line, he said confidently. You already have. You've bridged 2 worlds most thought were unbridgeable. She studied him then, really looked. His strong profile, silver woven through black like strands of twilight. His silence, his stillness. She remembered the first time he stood outside that grocery store, the way time had folded in around them. I've been thinking, she said, about what Elder Noya said, that we were dreamed together. Kael nodded, not needing her to finish. The hummingbird flies between worlds, and finds sweetness in unexpected places, she added softly, and somehow stays suspended between motion and stillness. Their eyes met, and something moved between them. Old as fire, new as rain. He reached across the space between the chairs, lacing his fingers through hers. When I dreamed of you, he said, his voice low and true, I thought it meant something was ending. But now, I think it meant something was just beginning. Maybe it was both, she whispered. Maybe one had to end, to make room. They sat like that as night blanketed the land. Coyotes called in the distance, their cries weaving into the silence like old stories retold by moonlight. There was so much ahead. Budgets and lesson plans, tensions to navigate, elders to consult, youth to guide. There would be meetings and boundaries and choices, all colored by this sacred in-between space they now occupied. But not tonight. Tonight, they just were. Together in the quiet. Together in the hum of the desert. Together in the space the hummingbird had opened. She touched her amulet, and at the same moment, Kael's hand moved to his. Their eyes met again. No words, just understanding. Whatever had called them together was still unfolding, still mysterious, still holy. Some stories aren't meant to be decoded, just lived. Some love is older than words. And just then, through the stillness, a hummingbird appeared, impossibly gloriously, wings humming fast as breath, heart pulsing like thunder in miniature. It hovered for a heartbeat and vanished into the dark. Neither of them spoke of it. Some things belong only to the spirit. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.